everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Rise Up, Voices from the Frontlines. And I am your host, Krista Fee, and I am very excited to bring to you today's guest, Steven Nisbet, who is going to share with you his personal story of triumph over trauma and the transformational work that he is doing to change the impact of the work that we do on the lives of first responders. So please welcome to the show today, Steven Nisbet. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the show with you.
I'm really excited to share your story because you've done so many things and you've had so many experiences, and you're so humble about your background. And I think people will really connect with you, and the work that you're doing is exceptional and important, and I just really want to help you get the word out about what you're doing. So I love to start at the beginning. So talk about your childhood a little bit and what made you interested in going into the military.
Sure. No, thank you again for having me on here and just giving us a platform to hopefully reach folks that are in your audience that potentially might have some trouble or struggling with anything that's going on in their personal lives. Um, to start, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, born in Colorado. My dad spent several years in the military as security forces, and then got out and went and became a police officer. And he spent about 30 years in the law enforcement industry, mostly working gangs. And so that was my childhood growing up. Was my dad was a cop. He was gone for a lot of Christmases or soccer games and things like that, and he was doing the duty of protecting others. And I never knew the experiences he had. I didn't like. He never brought any of it home. And never talked about really too much what was going on. And I know my mom listened to the police scanner quite often, and I always thought it was pretty cool, but I didn't understand it at all. I didn't really dive into it, and I really wish I did a little bit more. But played soccer growing up. Really was looking forward to potentially playing in college. I thought I was pretty decent athlete. But this high school that I went to, we didn't perform very well, and it wasn't like anyone was coming out to scout out Santa Rita High School in Tucson, Arizona, as a potential pick to go to these different schools. And I didn't have a lot of money growing up, so I didn't get a scholarship to the U of A like a lot of my friends did. Didn't have the money to pay for college to go there, and so I did a year in Pima Community College. And I was very interested in space, still am. The space just fascinates me as far as stars and pretty much just everything that is involved with space. And as I took an astronomy class and I looked around at the people around me, I was like, this is not my demographic. Like, as much as I enjoy space, it was not my people. It was just a different crowd. And I was like, this is not purposeful for me. I got to find something else. And I talked to my dad about joining the military, and he's like, well, you're going to join the Air Force. They're going to treat it best that way. So the pathway was to join the Air Force, do 4 years, and then join my friends. I was going to do a job that was going to get me into engineering, which is what my friends all did. And they're all engineers now. And I was like, man, I'm going to go back and work for Raytheon like they do. And we can meet up and be pals again. And went to a recruiter's office, and I scored pretty good on the ASVAB, and like, well, you can do pretty much whatever you want. And I selected a nuclear weapons apprentice, and I was like, that's the job. That's the one that's going to get me the pathway where I want to go, get free schooling with the GI Bill along the way, and then meet my pals at the end. And as I stepped out of the office, out of that Air Force recruiter's office, there's an Army recruiter next door. And he's like, hey, let me talk to you, son. And I was like, I'm good, man. I already signed. And he's like, hey, you want to be in Special Forces? And I stopped. My spidey senses went off. And I was like, man, I've never thought of that. Well, I hear what you got to say. And I listened to him. And I've never considered myself in that regard as far as what he was throwing at me. And I was like, man, that sounds really cool. And the $25,000 signing bonus for 50 years. Like, I'm going to do that. And I was like, hang on a second, I might be right back. So I walked over to the Air Force recruiter and I said, hey, do you guys have special operations jobs? And he said, yeah, but you wouldn't make it. Like, you're not going to make it. It's a 90% attrition rate. You already got your job picked out. Just stick with what you got. And I was like, how about you let me decide that and let me see what you have. And then he had two jobs, combat control and pararescue. And I looked them both up, didn't understand really either one of them. Pararescue is one that involved medicine. And I was like, I'm not really into medicine. Combat control sounds a little bit more combat oriented. And I was like, that sounds pretty fun. I'm going to do that. So I started training for that. And as I started training for that, and I go to take the pass test, the physical ability and stamina test, they say, all right, which one are you going to do? And I said, well, what do you mean? They're like, one has a swim at the end and one has a swim at the beginning. And I was like, well, I've been training with swim at the beginning, and all right, I'll do that. And so I didn't think there was any difference. And then I finished the test, and they're like, okay, you're going to be a PJ. And I was like, what? I thought I was going to be a combat controller. Like, it's the same thing. You're going to get to the to boot camp. You're going to go to indoc, and then you get to choose whatever you want there. It's the same thing. And I was like, and I believed him. And then I was duped. And I go to MEPS and I join and I do the whole show up to basic training, and I realize I've just signed up to become a pararescueman or a PJ, and that is not the pathway that I was specifically training for and looking for. And I was like, I thought that I could change whatever I wanted into something else, and it was not that way. And they used to have combat control indoc and pararescue indoctrination course in the same pipeline, but they had split apart. And these recruiters, they don't have that insight. So he was only telling me what he was familiar with on TV or whatever other people were telling him, and it was not that way. So I joined really to try to meet up with my buddies at the end, and then in spite of somebody telling me that I couldn't do something, I went up and started doing the thing they told me I couldn't do, and then joined, yeah, to become a PJ, and here I am today.
Here I am today. So what was the job like for you? What was that journey? Uh, the good and the bad.
Yeah, so showed up to Indoc, and Indoc, for those that don't know, and PJ's job is the easiest way to describe it without getting into a lot of detail is essentially the Air Force's version of what a Navy SEAL is, only it's very oriented towards medical response or paramedicine. So we still jump out of planes, still fly in helicopters, fast row, dive, both closed circuit and open circuit. So do all of the special operations duties, but we were very focused on rescue and recovery efforts. So um, the first part of training is your selection course. It was 12 weeks long. We started with 120 people. And at the end of that whole pipeline finished with just 12 of us original folks that started with the pipeline there. And it was, that selection course is very water confidence oriented. When they talk about drown proofing and they're trying to drown you, I think that's essentially what it was. Is I was being drowned for a good 10 weeks, 12 weeks. Doing underwaters, the length of the pool, swimming underwater with you know, cadre and instructors jumped at throwing stuff in the pool, beating you up. Um, and you had certain tests to pass, buddy breathing, massive snorkel recovery, ditch and don. So all these different things that are very water oriented, and really it's to apply stress and to see if you're going to quit in a high stress environment, to see how you react in these high stress environments. And it's also a pre scuba because you do all those things before you go into scuba diving. And so my first that 10 weeks, my first 12 weeks in the military of that indoc course, our course in 2006, we had a combat rescue officer trainee going through, and he ended up passing away during our course, during one of the iterations of water confidence training. The instructors pulled up and we jumped in the water, had to do we did a bunch of exercises, so heart rate's jacked up. And they're like, all right, stand at the end of the pool in the deep end, jump in the water, do a front flip underwater, swim to the other side of the pool underwater and back, and complete your swim. And as we're standing at the edge, everyone's heart is like, heart rate's at like 120, 130, and looking like, no way are we making this. And somebody was like, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. And like, just enter the water. And I was like, well, I'm going to pass out. This is, I just accepted it. So jumped in, did my front flip. There was a bench in the pool. and me and one of the other guys, and we grabbed this bench and we looked at each other, and we thought, when we pull this, we're going to launch. And instead, as we pulled the bench and try to swim forward, the bench instead flew back and hit the wall behind us, and we went zero forward. We didn't go forward at all. And I was like, I just wasted all of that energy, all of that one stroke is gone, and I like needed every bit of energy and controlling, or at least oxygen um, conservation as possible. So started swimming, got about halfway there, and I was like, I'm just gonna pop up and I'm just gonna take some air, which is frowned upon there. And as I looked to my right, I saw somebody just getting smashed by one of the instructors because he had popped up and was getting air, right? Not completing the task. And I was like, well, nope, not doing that because that looks miserable. And then touched the wall, come back, and then got to the end. When I got to the end, I was like, you start to black out. The first thing you do is start to lose perception of everything around you. The walls start caving in, so to speak. And so as everything started going black, I ended up hitting the wall at the other end with my head. Came up, gave the "I feel fine, Sergeant" sign, and then I see the instructor at the end of the pool, doing snapping and pointing in the pool. And one of the guys at the very beginning, when he jumped in, he did his front flip and passed out. So he'd been underwater, passed out, unconscious that entire swim, which usually takes about a minute. And so one of the most incredible feats of strength I've ever seen. One of the instructors dove in, grabbed him. This guy was not a light dude. He was probably 245 pounds. Grabbed him and like from the bottom of this 9 foot pool in one motion, just pushed him up and threw him onto the pool deck. And then he was in cardiac arrest. They started CPR on him, defibrillated him, got him in an ambulance. He had come back, and then when he got to the hospital, he ended up passing away there. And so that was my first experience with loss in my military career. And for me, that was I was telling myself like, okay, like I was prepared for this. Like this is essentially what I got into this for, is dealing with things like this to come along. And I didn't realize later in life and later throughout my career that that very loss would be compounded with several other losses throughout my career, and ultimately lead to my medical retirement and diagnosis with PTSD.
It's always interesting how um, they sneak back up on us.
Mhm.
There's like I worked in medical for many years, and the cases that bother me now didn't bother me then. It
Mhm.
was not until I stopped. It wasn't until I stopped with the adrenaline and stopped with the being needed and stopped with the constant um,
Mhm.
stimulation of the job
Mhm.
that it hit me. Did you said it accumulated for you. Did you feel like it bothered you early on, or did it just kind of all hit you at the end all at the same time?
I could tell it was starting to get to me, but more so. So after that training pipeline, and I started going to my units. I went to the 320th SDS out in Okinawa, Japan. Did the mainland Japan does this like tsunami disaster with the nuclear reactor meltdown, Fukushima, and everything. So try to work some recoveries out of there. Deployed a couple times to Afghanistan with some joint task forces. Went to the rescue squadron, deployed there several times, and did some CASEVAC, some casualty evacuation stuff. Very point of injury, and for those it was a phone, or like you have a radio and they make a scramble call, and you have 8 minutes to get off the ground and fly to wherever you're going. Don't know what to expect when you get there. You have a 9 line that says the injuries, who it is, what the injuries are, and their condition pretty much. And so you just have to be ready to receive whatever it is. And doing 10 of those a day for 4 to 5 months straight is kind of wears on you, more so the adrenaline rush, dump, adrenaline rush, dump. And then so you're going up and down. And after these deployments, I would come back from deploying, and my decompress time was I would tell my family, I'm not going anywhere. Like I have zero desire to go out somewhere for the first 2 weeks of coming back. If I go somewhere and I hear somebody complaining about food that's being serviced to them, that they don't have to make themselves. They don't have to worry about somebody like rockets incoming. They don't have to worry about anybody shooting at them or anything like that. Uh, I'm gonna lose my mind if somebody complains about something so minuscule and small. They have a right to do so, and it's just I could tell those things were building up that frustration, and then having several of my friends get killed on deployments, killed in training, things like that, and really it came to on my ninth deployment that I was distant from my family. I couldn't remember people I'd known for a long period of time. Um, I was I had anxiety. I would have irritable outbursts constantly, and then ultimately, my wife had come to me and said, "Hey, your kids are afraid of you." And it was specifically after an incident where I yelled at the kids, and I was overboard with yelling at them and really intimidating them. And every time afterwards of things like that, I would obviously feel ashamed and the way that I would make my kids feel. And I'm supposed to be this rock, this person that they can come to and protect them. And yet they're the ones, I'm the one that they fear the most. And so that hit me hard. And when my wife told me that, she told me at the right time where I was like, okay, something, I have to do something about this. This clearly isn't normal. And I thought about the symptoms of PTSD or PTSI or PTS, however you want to describe it. And I thought, I don't have those. I watch them on TV and whatnot. It's like I'm not waking up in the middle of the night like sweating and like trying to pull out a gun or choking my wife or anything like. I'm not doing those things. I'm not having these wild flashbacks where I'm crawling around on the floor and stuff. I'm not doing any like I don't disappear into a different world when I disappear. It's just I'm just zoned out. Like I push my kids on the swing and then realize that like my kids aren't on the swing anymore and I'm still pushing it. Those kinds of things. But I'm not thinking about anything. I'm just zoned out. My brain has shut off. And so I emailed my psychologist embedded in my unit. I was like, what do people come to you and talk to you about? Like, I don't even know where to start. And then we set up a meeting, and then I was very resistant. And then ultimately, she asked some questions about my sleep. She asked questions about memory, about things in the past and whatnot. And she was like, well, we can take some tests and whatnot, but until you have some pretty severe PTSD, that needs to be addressed. And so it was um, periods of time, just to answer your question in a very long way, that it compounded um, in the times when I wasn't at work actively being stimulated, when I was at home with my family, is when it really piled on. And like we say in our nonprofit is the families see it the first, see it the most, and they see it first because we're not stimulated. Back then I would have rather been getting shot at and in combat than being around my kids crying. I was taking every deployment and every trip I could possibly be on. And I was doing those specifically so I can just get away from something I was so uncomfortable with, which was my family life. And that's what leads to destruction and folks not knowing how to deal with a normal life with their family. And I feel like a lot of folks in the first responder community and the veteran community can resonate with that.
I think we get lost in the conversation about post-traumatic stress disorder and the diagnostic criteria and these are the symptoms and then this is what it looks like and we forget that people experience things in different ways and we
Mm.
also don't talk about disassociation which is mentioned of course in the diagnostic criteria but it's not as common
Yeah.
as everyone goes, oh, I'm going to be angry. Oh, I'm going to be mad at everybody. And I'm going to be depressed. And I'm going to want to kill myself. Like that's kind of the model that most people who aren't really studying it kind of expect to see. So these these subtle shifts in withdrawing from the people that we love are often not perceived as post traumatic stress. And like you said earlier, the conversation, we always just go, oh, post traumatic stress, PTSI, whatever we're going to call it at this point. But what we're really talking about is accumulations of occupational and traumatic stress And it
Hmm.
may or may not be, it's a spectrum. I mean, we all have trauma, we all have experiences, we all lie on this continuum somewhere. How does our brain adapt? How did our nervous system adapt? What changes in our neurochemistry have happened? And that's what results in all of those symptoms. So it's not that you're just behaving like a jerk. You're being all angry and you're not able to treat your kids appropriately. It's literal chemical, physical changes in your body and in your mind, and those are hard to notice. Those are hard to perceive from the inside out. So yes, absolutely, family notices first. What kind of things did your wife, in the earlier days before it was like really apparent when you needed to go seek out treatment, did she try to express to you that you were changing?
Yeah, I think the natural tendency, especially for folks like me and my community, is to get angry, to be like, no, I'm not, I'm just being normal, especially if I'm being too hard on the kids. She would and be afraid to tell me, walk on eggshells, be afraid to tell me that I'm being too hard on the kids, and my response would be like, I'm just being a dad. That's just like they need a dad, they need a strong personality, a strong father figure in their lives to correct them in certain ways. And there are some aspects where, like, yes, I agree that there is like they need to have discipline in their lives, but to the extent of where I would go and where I know some of my friends and teammates and people in my position where it gets overboard as far as like how fast the irritability lights up. Rather than it's easy to tell the kids no, like no, I'm not going to do that. No, we're not going to go out and do these fun things because I don't feel like it because I just want to sit and do nothing. And that I try to start being more aware of, and she would mention those things of we're not able to go out and do these things because you never want to do anything. You always want to sit at home. Like, well, yeah, because I don't like I'm not comfortable being out in these places. And the other thing is she would say I'm paranoid about everything. And naturally I was because my job surrounded me with death. Um, every single way that somebody could possibly pretty much die, burning alive, being blown up, shot, traumatically, getting hit by cars, things like that. Like we weren't just treating uh, Americans overseas; we were treating everybody. And a lot of times there was kids that were getting injured in some way overseas, and it would make me very hyper aware of how fast death and serious harm can come to somebody, and how fragile life was. So my paranoia was anytime the kids were outside, that all I could visualize was them getting hit by a car or somebody taking them, or if they went to a friend's house and they had a pool, like they're drowning. Like that's I couldn't focus on anything else than that itself. Um, that there were something bad was going to come their way. So um, she tried to point that out to me, and it just wasn't. It was hard for me to accept.
That's such a hard one. I still struggle with that you have seen it, so you know the risks. And we live in a society where ignorance is bliss, right? People don't think, they go about their daily lives not realizing the risks that they're taking.
Right.
But there comes a point where when you've seen it, you go, oh, wait, that is a real risk. That can actually happen. And then you start putting a list in your head of all the things that can actually happen. So have you managed to have you managed to step back from that and internally, not just with the behavioral changes where you go, oh, I shouldn't be worried about this, I shouldn't be telling everybody that this is a possibility, but have you managed to calm that internal dialogue? Because honestly, I still struggle with that internal dialogue of, well, this is dangerous and that's a thing you probably shouldn't do, and this is what can happen, and this is why that's a bad idea. Being that person that's like, let me tell you all the reasons why not to do that.
I wouldn't say. I mean, it'll never go away. That paranoia will never go away. What I do now is I become more prepared, and that's what I tell my wife. I'm not paranoid. I'm prepared. So I'm not going to restrict. I don't restrict the kids from doing something, but I'm prepared for when things go wrong. And something I like to, well, I don't like to, but I feel that I am just surrounded by a black cloud of doom. Like something is going to go wrong around me. I took my daughter to the hospital just a couple weeks ago for just smashing up her face, doing something I knew was going to happen at some point with her riding her scooter like 20 miles an hour down the hill in front of the house, and she bit the dust one day and just really had a gash on her chin. And so several things go wrong like that where it's like, okay, I knew that was going to happen. She is fine, but I'm prepared. And I run through these scenarios, not unlike anybody in my position, especially law enforcement, fire, veterans, just running through scenarios in your head of like, if this happened, what am I going to do? And whether it's healthy or not, it helps me because then I have the answers beforehand, and that's what I would do in my job when I was a PJ. I would go through everything that could possibly happen. If the helicopter, our you know wingman helicopter, or the paired helicopter that we'd fly two shift, if the other helicopter went down, I would go through that in my head, and what would that look like? How would I extricate my friends out of there? What am I gonna do? And I would run through all these all the time. Like if we're on the range, if somebody gets shot, what am I gonna do? If this building gets hit with rockets, what are we gonna do? Like those are constantly going through my head so that when it does happen, if it happens, it's not the first time I've thought of it. And I have at least a foundation of what I'm gonna do. I don't think that answers your question, but
No, that was
uh,
great.
yeah, but I just become more prepared. I don't stop them from doing stuff. I just become more prepared.
Yeah, that's exactly where I had to go with it too. Was I can't be interfering with other people living their lives. I want
Hmm.
people to have joyful lives full of experiences, and my stress and my anxiety can only be focused on making sure that outcomes are as positive as possible.
Right. Exactly. Mhm.
So, are you still in the service?
I am not. Nope. I medically retired 2 years ago in 2021, um, after with a diagnosis of PTSD, after my 10th deployment and an accident that took place while I was team leader, and that really kind of led me down the pathway of this is not the job for me anymore. I Not that I lost confidence in myself as in skill wise and whatnot, because I've still been tested as a PJ just in my daily life when things go wrong around me. But it's not something I wanted to actively do anymore. I didn't want to put myself in a dangerous situation anymore that pulled me away from my family. My son's 13 now, and over the past 16 years, I've missed 9 of his birthdays. So now that I'm out of the military and I have the opportunity to spend more time with my children and learn who they are, and that's what I've done. I've spent a lot of time learning who my oldest son is, who I've spent most of his life I spent away from him, uh, and now I have an opportunity to give that back, or make up for that lost time.
You talk about family, and a lot of folks in the military and in the first responder lifestyles struggle with their significant other relationship. The statistics on divorce are absolutely like offensive. we're
Hmm.
Depending on where you're looking, I mean, we're seeing over 80% is some of the suggestions. So, are you still married to your wife?
I am, yeah, and I had I recently did a panel about just my experiences with the transition of getting out, and then just how the traumas have affected me and my marriage and my life. And so, fortunately, my wife didn't leave me, even though I gave her a lot of opportunities to. And I have an opportunity to rebuild a relationship with my entire family. And I would say an individual came up to me and asked, like, "Hey, when your wife said that your kids were scared of you, like, what did you do?" And at the moment I was in, And the best advice I can give to somebody that's in that position is listen. It's easy to go right back to, like, no, I'm not. This is just who I'm normal. But if this individual who knows you and you got into a relationship early on, especially before the career or at the middle of your career, wherever you are, they knew you the way you were and they saw some changes. And you may not notice those changes, but if you just take a second and put the ego aside and listen to this person who's telling you you're not acting normal, there's an opportunity for growth there, and there's an opportunity to heal a relationship that is something that they valued at some point. I think a lot of our demographic seeks excitement outside of their relationship for different reasons. Number one, they're ashamed of the things that they've done in service, and they don't feel they deserve the life they currently have. They don't feel like they deserve the person who stood next to them this entire time. It's easier to be hated than to be loved. So those are things that folks in our position, they go and seek that attention somewhere else, or they're not feeling validated. If they can find a way to say, "Hey, I'm not being heard or appreciated the way that I feel like I need to," and let's say somebody else is giving me that attention, uh, they're going to go seek out that attention from somebody else or something else, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or persons, people. So my biggest advice in a relationship is to put the ego aside and listen to each other without emotions, as hard as that is to do.
Right. So for you, what was the transition phase like? What was coming out of that career and having all that time on your hands? How did that progress for you?
Yeah, so I was transitioning out. I had about a year pretty much. I told my boss I'm not showing up to work for for the last year of my career as I transitioned out, and I told him, "Hey, I'm not going to be a liability to you, but I'm also not going to serve you any good here because I have things that I want to do when I get out." And I think folks in our position, when they're transitioning out of any career they've done most of their entire adult life, that becomes their identity. And a lot of times you lead conversations with, "I am this. I am a police officer, or a firefighter, or a PJ, or a Green Beret, whatever it is." And then you start to realize people in the civilian world, as you transition into a regular civilian life, don't care. Like they honestly, like, they're like, "Oh, like I told them about hostage rescue missions I've done and this and that." Like, them being a company I was interning for, and the people were great, and they're outstanding. And they were listening to me like, "Wow, that was incredible! Like, what a crazy story! The things that you've experienced are crazy." Okay, back to the business, and then it was just back to normal, and it was like, okay, well, I got the validation I was looking for, but I did. It wasn't. It was short lived, and it was like, oh, these people aren't essentially worshiping me for what I've done. They're not doing anything extra. They're just, yeah, thanks for the story, and then they're back to their daily lives as if I didn't even tell them the story. So that was a wake up call of like, all right, I need to stop hanging my hat on what I used to do and thinking about what I'm going to do next. What am I going to do next? What am I going to take the lessons I've learned in the career that I had and either do it for myself and for my family, or do it for good, or do it for both, or how do I navigate this next pathway in my life? Uh, and really, a lot of that was taking time off. That, like I said, I took a year off and focused on who I was. Uh, because at the end of the day, what I like to tell folks is, you, the second that I pretty much stopped showing up to work, or was no longer team leader of the team, and those guys are still deploying and training and whatnot, and the next day I'm off the team thread. I'm off the text chain, and they have their business text chain to talk about training and whatnot. And I was like, oh, okay, so I guess I just have my family. And that's the only piece of people that are there left to pick up the pieces when you get out. My old unit's not going to be there asking how I'm doing. A lot of my friends are going to be too busy to worry about how I'm doing. Um, so the only people that are there are my family. So that's why I invest a lot of time in the family, a lot of time into who I'm gonna be, and what I wanted to do next.
So that's the best part of the story. What are you doing now?
Not what I really set out to do. What I set out to do when I transitioned, um, briefly, one of the biggest reasons I got out is I was the team leader of our group of guys, our group of PJs and combat controllers. Part of our training is to do mountain rescue and rock climbing. We went to Boise, Idaho to do some rock climbing. As we were out there, really doing a team building trip and some skills development, one of our folks, as team members, as he placed an anchor, we're getting to the top of a 70-foot face after a good rock climb. All of us are up there, uh, finishing up the last climb of the day, and first guy goes down the rappel line. After we climb up, he sets up a rappel line. First guy gets down, and as I'm doing some instruction, the second guy starts his rappel and gets about halfway down, and the anchor or the rock that the anchor is in fails. So the rock shatters with the camming devices and a nut that's in there. And so when it fails, the guy that's on the roof fell 30 feet. One of our other guys was tied into the anchor on the top with his piece of kit and rope. And the weight of one of our team members pulled the other one off the top of the cliff. And so one fell 30 feet, and one fell about 70 feet and impacted the ground below. And went down with the team, and we treated him as best we could for between 25 and 30 minutes before the fire department showed up. And ultimately, with the injuries he sustained on impact, he died and passed away there on the scene. And so that was really the most challenging loss I've ever experienced. And I lost a lot of friends and teammates and I treated them. But this one was stateside in training. We were talking about where we're going to go for dinner that night, and so it was so quick and unsuspected, and it was like I didn't even have a chance. Like all the other teammates and friends, like I was able to treat them, and there was an opportunity to get them to save them. And with him, it was like I would felt so helpless and lost that do, I couldn't save him, and I couldn't treat him the way I wanted to, and get him to the hospital. And I felt a lot of guilt and shame, and that I still do. That he wasn't even really on my particular team. He was a guest from somebody else's team that was tagging along, and so I felt like a parent who had another child in their house, and that other child passed away. And so those other team leaders and team members trusted me with keeping him safe, and I couldn't do that, and even more so his family. So that was a really really challenging time, which led to my pathway out. And as I was looking at my pathway out, I had utilized our resources at our unit, which was our psychologists, our strength conditioning coaches, our physical therapists, dietitians, really trying to do everything I can to make sure that I'm okay, and doing everything I can to take care of myself and my family. And I came to the realization I'm going to lose those resources, and I'm going to be stuck to the VA. And being in the special operations world, I'm used to a certain quality of care, and it was easily accessible. And I was going to lose that quality of care, and I was going to be treated like everybody else, and that didn't sit well with me. I was going to be stuck in the VA system, and I just thought there's certainly a better way. And so as I looked at the resources out there, current nonprofits, current organizations, and nothing was doing it the way that we had it at our unit, and I thought I got to create something. So ultimately asked Dr. Jennifer Byrne, who's a spouse of somebody in our community, and she's a doctor of occupational therapy. Said, hey, she has the same passion as me. Will you help me start up this nonprofit to service veterans and first responders that are suffering with the things that I suffered with, or dealing with the same traumas I've been dealing with, and get them a similar quality of care to what I've received, would help me significantly. So started up Shields and Stripes, the shields being those that wear the badge of law enforcement and fire, and then stripes are for your military. And typically your military career fields are enlisted, and they typically have the stripes involved in those enlisted career fields as their ranks. And so started that nonprofit, asked Exos, which is a pro performance company that typically works with professional athletes. They also work with special operations athletes or special operations members to do rehab, physical rehab and recovery. Had a relationship with them after a shoulder injury and said, hey, can we use your facility, bring in veterans and first responders in there and get them some high quality care? And they agreed to it. And so we've been doing that for 2 years now, 2 years this month, and bring in 8 veterans and first responders into the Exos facility where they get a strength conditioning program. They get a dietitian consult and meals made on site for them specifically. PT, so physical therapy, occupational therapy, massage, yoga, and then they get their psych therapy, their individual and group therapy. Additionally, we've partnered with Therabody, which they provide products to our cohorts, Theraguns, smart goggles, and then another partnership with Big Fish Foundation, who they provide physical therapy kits for when they leave there. When they leave Exos, here's a kit to do continued physical therapy, because once they're there for 3 weeks at Exos, um, they leave, and we want to make sure that that care continues on, that they're doing the right things, that the stuff that they learned in person. And so it's another 9 weeks of telehealth, and they still have a strength coach, they still have a dietitian, they still have a physical therapist and a psychologist working with them and their family to incorporate everything they learned in person now at home. And so it's a 3 month total program, completely free to the veteran and the first responder. And it's just been continually growing ever since. So yeah, that's what I do now.
I love your mission. I love your mission, and I love what you do. You're right in line with us and what we'd like to see in the future. It's very interesting that you take it from the standpoint that you do with the whole person, whole lifestyle, but you come from such intensive training that the importance of that physicality is really dominant in your programming, and uh, there's a lot to say for that physical wellness, and it gets neglected when we have these conversation about post-traumatic stress. We talk a lot about mental health and we talk about mental wellness, but we don't talk about the ways that our bodies actually are affected and the things that we can do to prevent the negative outcomes. So it's wonderful to see a program that's actually addressing, food matters,
You're right.
lifestyle matters, intensity of physical exercise matters, and providing all those tools for people. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, precisely. I think a lot of us, when we are struggling and just figuring out our ways, how do we deal with some of these traumas, or we're holding it in, and a lot of us, we wear it on our bodies. We stop eating healthy. We start drinking more, not sleeping very good. I imagine 90 to 100% of us in our positions have some sort of sleep apnea, whether it's mild or severe. At 30 years old, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. I'm not obese, I'm not overweight. I don't have any other conditions. I just stop. My body stops breathing at night, and I don't know why. It's just the traumas that we've experienced, and so have some, along those nightmares. So all these things compound, and usually we wear it on our bodies. And if you can start eating healthy and you can start moving right the way that you used to, you had an academy, you had a boot camp where you had to be physically fit at some point. Well, let's get you back to that drive. Let's get you back to where you used to be, so you can feel good. Not now, not for the job, but for your family.
I think there's an element of self-value there too. Is if we let ourselves go, especially if we're feeling guilt and shame, if we let ourselves go, then we don't have to value ourselves. We don't have to say, oh, I love myself. I love this body. I can do all these things with my body. It lets there be more excuses to hate oneself. It lets there be more reasons to I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. I should just disappear. So
Precise.
creating that foundation of self-love without talking about it in ways that, self-love kinds of ways. You're doing it in a very masculine, very, very culturally appropriate way to reach
Yeah.
those that most want to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right. I think a lot of our folks, That they feel like they don't deserve, the care that they get. I'd also say, one piece of advice for the folks that are out there that are listening, one of the pitfalls we have is comparing traumas. Um, More often than not, I hear, first responders say, "Well, I haven't seen the stuff that you've seen." I'm like, just, no, there's no way mine can match yours. And I'm like, you got to get out of that mentality. Everybody experiences things differently, and I also haven't seen the things that they've seen. So going and to domestic violence calls and or car accidents where the entire family killed, or digging up bodies that have been buried in shallow graves. Like, I haven't seen those, and if I have, I haven't seen it in my hometown where I'm living. I'm not. I don't drive by the places that I experienced trauma overseas. I don't. Those aren't down the street from me, 10 minutes down the road, and I don't have people wondering where I live at night to potentially come and break into my house and harm me and my family. So those are the things that I don't have to particularly worry about, and they do. So I would highly advise, those first responders out there that do, and other veterans that do make comparisons like that, don't do that. Everybody experiences it in their own way, and this is your time to get the help that you need.
How many cohorts do you do every year?
But right now, we don't do two. It does cost about $15,000 to put one person through it, and that covers all their travel, their lodging. They stay in a nice resort hotel, and then it covers the actual therapy itself with our clinicians and the providers there at Exos. So it does cost quite a bit. It is 3 months, and we do 8 at a time. So it's about 115, $120,000, up to $150,000 per cohort, just depending on the time of year and then where the economy's at, especially with travel. But we do 2 a year right now, and that's only dependent upon funds. The goal is to do 9 a year, using 3 different Exos facilities, so hosting 3 cohorts per facility per year. So that's the goal. Hopefully, we can reach that sometime soon, so we can pretty much quadruple our numbers that are going through our cohorts. We are in the process of innovating new ways to reach more people.
Awesome. Okay, everybody out there, if you would like to get in touch with Steven, if you'd like to know more about his organization, we will put a link. Depending on where you are viewing this podcast, it will either be below the podcast or above the podcast in the description. So, is there any last words that you would like to give people? What's your favorite quote or your favorite words of wisdom?
I don't have a favorite quote. Well, I do, but it's more leadership. I lead people because I want to be a leader. Um, People follow me because they want to, not because they have to. So that's the type of leader that I would like to be, and I'd encourage anybody out there that's the motto they should live by, especially in their leadership role. But last words of wisdom for folks out there is much the same: of set your ego aside. Um, People want you here. Usually, people take their lives, and it's a 5 second decision. It's a decision that's made it over a small period of time where it's very emotional. So um, please seek out some help, whether it's through us or many other nonprofits, organizations that are out there. There are other ways to solve problems. So never give up. Don't quit. Just stay in the fight.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, so much for listening to this episode of Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines. Again, if you'd like to support Steven's organization, Shields and Stripes, we will add the link for that. And if you'd like to support Battle to Be, our 501c3 that runs this podcast, you can do that as well at battle2be.org. That's BATTLE, the number 2, BE.org. And I look forward to seeing you all next week for our next episode of Rise Up Voices from the Frontline.